money is a socially constructed thing. It's weird. We talk about the pound strengthened against the dollar, the euro strengthened against the yen. It happened. It's a social construction that we as humans, wars, deforestation, famine, they are socially constructed things. The whole process of player development, career coaching is shrouded in the essence of sociology, social psychology, of understanding that this is about things we can't measure. The reality of elite sport is that it's going to put your mental health under some sort of strain. It just is. Elite sport is about pushing mind, body, soul to the edge. A lot.
Welcome back to the Football Economy, the show where we go deep into the business behind the beautiful game. Today's guest is Dr. Chris Platts, a career coach and researcher dedicated to transforming player development in professional football. Chris is the architect of the largest independent study ever conducted on the career trajectories of professional players within leagues within football. Having tracked over 300 young footballers over 15 years, now he uses those profound data-driven insights to help players and their families predict their future, navigate their careers, and go through this cutthroat industry, and helping them having a promising future. Through his research and coaching, Chris is empowering the next generation to take control of their journeys, ensuring that they thrive in this football world and in this life. Without any further ado, thank you, Chris, for coming onto the show.
Thanks for having me.
I think what we'd like to start, first of all, is basically understanding your true motives in terms of being a career coach, but also someone who has a research background. Obviously, I do understand that this comes from your thesis in 2012, but I want to go deeper into you as a let's call it a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, basically the same position of the sort of like targets group that you advise and the families. What would have been going through the mind of young Dr. Chris or young Chris in that sense?
Yeah, so I think I look back, I was okay at school. I went to a school that had people from a lot of different backgrounds. I think later on in my life, as I got to university, I didn't do great in my A-levels, but as I got to university, I studied sport and exercise science, and I was introduced to this thing called sociology. So in undergraduate sports science, we did psychology, physiology, biomechanics, coaching, but we also did sociology of sport. And it was probably at that moment where a lot of things that had been occurring to me in life, that I had seen in life, started to make sense, or I first engaged with something that explained things to me. Race, social class, inequalities in societies, gender. And sociology is really good at getting people to do two things. One, look at things as a process. So don't, in England, a really good example is how we track data from when the Premier League started, when clearly football was pretty big before the Premier League as well. So sociology is very good at processing things, making us look a long way back in history on the roots of where issues have come from. And the second thing it's really good at, which probably relates most to the question, is one of the main purposes of sociology is to force you to walk in other people's shoes, to get you to see issues from somebody else's perspective, understand their constraints, their enablers, what's been occurring in their network of relationships that makes them think the way they do. Over the course of the next couple of years, and I went on to do a master's in sociology of sport as well, these became really powerful tools for me to understand the world of sport. So at undergraduate, that would be doping in sport, how participation is split across those societal factors like gender, race and ethnicity, geographical location, income, class, so on and so forth. Now, when I was 12, I don't think I recognized it at the time, but I was going through a bit of a process of already being in that space, of learning that society was full of differentiation, unequal opportunities, because I saw it in my world. I got a lot of opportunities that other kids didn't. I also saw other kids get different opportunities to me because of other factors. that's where I think my head was already at. And it was almost like the stars aligned as sociology came to me. It started to make sense. I had the tools to make sense of the world around me in a way that I'd already probably started to question, but didn't have those tools.
Right, understood. So, I mean, most people within the sports industry who look at sports science would look at or consider more the physiological side of football. What sets you apart in terms of like looking at the sociological side of football?
It's a different philosophical starting point. So if we were to take research right back to its very beginnings, we have two fancy words called ontology and epistemology. We're not going to go into those big time. That's like 2-hour teaching session I do. But in essence, there are things that we can measure, and physiologists are very, very good at doing that. So if we put somebody onto a machine, we can measure VO2 max. We can measure resting heart rate. We can measure recovery. We can measure lactate threshold 1, lactate threshold 2. We have measures. And we could widen that out to the other so-called harder sciences, your physics or chemistry, where we can measure, we can see things. That's one side of kind of a research. But there's also another thing that occurs in life, which we can't always measure. Things that are humans, that humans have socially constructed. So the way I sort of do this when I'm teaching this to students is, if humans were to die away, what would not be left? And those are the things that are socially constructed. And it gets weird because you realize that a lot of the things that we rely on in life are socially constructed. Time, money is a socially constructed thing. It's weird. We talk about the pound strengthened against the dollar, the euro strengthened against the yen. It happened. It's a social construction that we as humans, wars, deforestation, famine, they are socially constructed things. Now, where sort of social psychology, sociology, political sciences sit is more in the realm of trying to understand the things that we have socially constructed. Now, in what I do now, football transfer markets are socially constructed. They are not things that have a being beyond humans. They aren't like atoms and molecules that if humans were to die out, they would still be here. If humans die out, there would be no football. There would be no sport. There would be no transfer. There would be no player development. There would be no transfer fees. There would be no loan deals. These are all socially constructed. So the whole process of player development, career coaching is shrouded in the essence of sociology, social psychology, of understanding that this is about things we can't measure, emotions, feelings, okay, things, fear, courage, vulnerability. These are, some people, you can measure your vulnerability. Not easily, and not reliably, and over again. So that's where, when I look at sort of clubs and they have multidisciplinary teams, generally they are loaded towards the hard science, right? What can we measure? How can we get our players to be better? And then they do all this measurements and they do all this fitness planning. Everything's in place. And then the social relationship between the head coach and the players falls apart. Doesn't matter. Everything's gone.
Understood. I mean,
Sociology.
yeah, understood. I mean, so if we look at a terminology that you've sort of like repeated over your course of like different interviews, you mentioned survivorship bias. So obviously people who understand psychological terms or exposed to psychology would understand what this means. But in terms of the footballing, so like concept of footballing industry, what does this term mean? Like, how have you linked this to the events that shape the sort of like the post playing careers or non-playing careers of these footballers in academies?
Yeah. So I've linked it to those who are playing as well. But survivorship bias comes from, let me start with a story to try and explain survivorship bias, because I like this story and it's a very well-worn story. I'm not taking any credit for starting this story, by the way, but it's been told hundreds of times. So some researchers were tasked with finding out and analysing where bullets hit aircraft. And in scanning planes that returned from missions, they found that bullets had mainly hit the wings and the tail of planes. So the army, military took this data, really thank you for that data, and were in the process of deciding that it'd be a good idea, therefore, to reinforce the wings and the tail of the plane, until the lead researcher, his name escapes me right now, sort of highlighted the error of their ways here of, we're only analysing the planes that have returned from these missions. These are the ones that survived. If we are to complete this in research terms, if we are to develop a study that is thorough, reliable, valid, etc., we also need to be analysing the planes that were shot down. Now, if we start to link that towards football, where I find algorithms, scouting, so on and so forth, fall into this trap, and it's not their fault, it's like an easy thing to do, is we start to look at the makeup of Premier League teams and go, okay, so that's what they need to look like. But we're only analysing those who survived. And along the way, nobody's analysing those who left the game. More than that, because the scouts who are working start to look at this end here, the end product, that then brings in some bias into what they're starting to look for. So they start to pick out the ones who are taller, the ones who are quicker, the ones, etc. at an early. So of course they get through the system more. And that just reinforces, there's a perpetual cycle of reinforcing survivorship bias. Not necessarily because that's been the best way to go, but it's because both internally through, say, scouting, but also because we're only analysing those at the end of the pipeline, so to speak, that we end up with a false understanding of what the end product is like. And it's something that's sort of plagued my thought, and I've blogged about it and things, because I see it, I hear coaches talk about it, I hear scouts talk about it. I've worked with parents who have been on the end of this sort of stuff, and it could be so much better. It's not too difficult to understand how it can be this data can be misunderstood. So yeah, and that's, of course, it's another thing that you get from sort of that research.
Understood. I mean, part of your research shows players who take loan deals before the age of 21 are more likely to stay within the football pyramid, let's call it 1 to 2 seasons longer. But currently, right now, we're dealing with a situation that is obviously at the top of everyone's discussion, is Kobe Mainoo. So I think you've highlighted this, you've discussed, you've added your commentary to this. I just want to understand from your perspective right now, having seen the path that United have created for him, or lack of pathway for him, what actionable steps would you be advising the current management or team within the United hierarchy to find a more sustainable way to solve these sort of like issues that will obviously continue to come on for youth players, academy players within a club as big as United?
Yeah, wow. So this is how I would do it. If they want to get in touch with me, I'm free for a chat. There are other players who this has occurred to. So let me start with, again, a little story, and then we'll come back to Kobe Mainoo to show. Yesterday, I was at a conference where somebody spoke about when Chelsea signed Eden Hazard and Oscar at a point where Ruben Loftus-Cheek was about to sort of come up through the ranks in the way that we're seeing Kobe Mainoo do at Manchester United. When Eden Hazard signed for Chelsea, he'd had 2 seasons in men's football, and Ruben Loftus-Cheek had had 1 Carabao Cup appearance. They also signed Oscar at the same time, I think sort of roughly the same position on the pitch. So it does happen at other clubs, and I'm saying this because there's an awareness that I do talk about Kobe Mainoo's situation a bit, and it feels like I'm just having a go at man. But he's probably, as you say, the most high-profile example of that. This comes down to strategically how good, as a club, you understand why your academy exists. I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek's work of always begin with why, always start with why. And there's been a hell of a lot of change going on at Manchester United, so perhaps understandably, they haven't got to every job yet. But I think the first thing you need to do if you were a director of football or you buy into a football club, what is it? Why is this academy existing? What is it for? Is it because it's a lost leader and we are trying to develop. So we'll overspend, and because we know that we'll get a Trent Alexander-Arnold through to our first team, and in the hundreds of appearances that he's put in for the club, that's going to be a cost-effective way of getting 1 or 2 players a season into our first team. Okay, the academy loses some money, but it's not as much as it would have cost us to buy a Trent Alexander-Arnold. Are we a club that develop and sell? We get players in. This is Benfica. We get players in, we develop them, and then we're looking to sell them on for a profit, knowing full well that we might then. Joao Felix has gone to, where did he? Atletico Madrid. We didn't see his best years at our club, and that's a shame, but that's the model. Now, so that's the first step. If I was at Manchester United in their current situation, I would be saying, do we know that? Now, if we did know that, let's say 2 years ago, and they've got others now coming up through the ranks, the good players, I mean, the name of the guy that signed from Arsenal, I would then say, what is our strategic approach to get Kobbie Mainoo to be a world-class player when he's 26? Because that is the aim here. So we sit down, okay, we've got a club captain. We've got Bruno Fernandes in his position. Let's not shy away from it. Let's not hide from it. But if we look at my data, we know that somebody like Kobbie Mainoo needs to be playing football. He needs to be playing a good level of football, in a squad situation where he's not playing 45 games a season all the time, etc. But he is that good that we know he needs to be on the edge of his comfort zone. Is he there if we've got him on the bench 90% of the season? No, he isn't. Okay, so what are we going to do? Where do we send him out on loan? Are we willing to send him out on loan for the longer term good of him? Because then when he's had a season on loan somewhere, probably in Europe, because we don't want him playing against us, for rivals in the Premier League, right? That is where I would be saying, why are we not doing this? Because, as you say, refer to the data, he isn't getting better on that bench. And I think too easy it can be slipped into come on, you got to fight for your place. But to me, it strikes like there's a couple, I don't know the insides out of Manchester United, it strikes me that they have put their faith in Bruno Fernandes, who's a very, very good football player, as the captain. And barring injury, he is going to be playing. So it seems to me that, which again, fine, that's the way you've gone, not a problem. So now where does that take us to in a chart around what we're going to do with a Kobbie Mainoo to get him the games, so that if somebody else comes in, he's got games under his belt to improve, to make mistakes, to risk stuff, to have a try at stuff, to not have the good games, to have the footage to watch, all these things, and in my mind, him dropping in for the cup game away at Grimsby, it's like, in a development sense, that isn't working out for him. So, it happened sort of with Ruben Loftus-Cheek at Chelsea, ended up leaving. I'm pretty confident Manchester United do not want Kobbie Mainoo to leave. I think if you've got players who you are aiming towards your first team, and this goes for a club at any level, what is the strategy to get them there? And we could look at other elements of this. There's the sort of the story of Haaland nearly signing for Manchester United on Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. And I think maybe even before that as well. And then the next bit, often when you hear people talking about it, is, then they would have had like a 200, well, how much is Haaland worth? 200 million pounds probably, right? But then I think I want to step in and say, but hang on, would he? Because would he have had the same opportunities, the same level of football if, as a youngster, when Manchester United wanted to sign him for, next to nothing, and he went to Borussia Dortmund instead, if he'd have come to Manchester United, would he have got the same opportunity? Because if that's not the case, then you wouldn't have had Haaland as he is now on your hands, would you? You'd have had a different player. So the data that I use with clubs is more, if you know this is the trajectory of Haaland, okay, well, how many games did Haaland get to play? So when you bring in Rasmus Højlund, are you willing to give him that number of games?
Right. I mean, what I would say to that is Haaland is an outlier in the sense that he has a parent who obviously play football at the highest level, got exposed to the ins and outs of the business of football, and obviously with the mom, who's also an athletic individual, if I'm not mistaken, have understood what it means to have a career plan for the player. And this is what you see with the strategic pathway they've chosen for the player.
Yeah.
And this is why the player is obviously has developed over time. So you are right. If he went into a dysfunctional environment such as United was at that time, it might not have been the same Haaland that we see today. And you see the same case with Jude Bellingham, who obviously had a parent who played non-professional football but played football. He was exposed to the industry in that sense, and he understood the imperative around having a guidance around his sons and giving them a very eyes wide open reality check of what the industry is like and giving them that pathway. This is the reason why he rejected United, regardless of the shiny objects they presented to him in terms of like Ferguson, Roy Keane, and the likes being there on the training ground. Okay, so I mean, one of the pieces of your research and your data is that you've calculated that over 1,000 players in the Premier League 2 and Professional Division League basically are considered facilitator players. For our listeners and viewers who might not be in this sort of like industry or understand the term itself, what does facilitator player mean? And what is the long-term implication of this for the industry?
For the industry or for the player?
For the player and the industry.
And the industry. Okay, yeah. When players sign at the age of 18 as a professional, many clubs have under 21 squads. The under 21 teams of Category 1 academies, so those who are the top tier academies in England and Wales, in what's called Premier League 2. I think there's 29 clubs in that. I want to say 29 clubs. Then we have the professional development leagues. Those are clubs who are Category 2. I think there might be some Category 3 in there as well, under 21 squads. So if you have an under 21 squad and you've got a Category 2 or Category 3 academy, you go into there. There's another 20 teams in there. Based on rough squad size, there's over 1,000 players at under 21 level. But here's the sort of insight that often gets missed, I think. Under 21 football in the Premier League 2 and Professional Development League isn't proper football. Isn't people would say in the industry it's not real football. And what they mean by that is there's no mortgages on the line. There's no bills that need to be paid based on performance. It's a development environment, which I'm also not against, but it's not always about winning all the time and the pressures that brings. So while it has a space, if an under 21 player joins an under 21 squad at the age of 18, and 2 or maybe even 3 seasons later, they are still in and around that. Yes, they're in a development phase, but they're not exposing themselves to the harshness and the brutality of the, I want to say, the full professional level of the game. The level of the game where people have moved from development to, right, it was no more development here, it's now. We get out there and we do this now. Where the term facilitator player comes from is, and it occurs at under 18 level as well, clubs probably know that at the age of 18, whilst they may give all of their under 18s a 2-year professional deal, they might be firing 3 of those towards their first team. They might have a couple more that they think they could possibly sell on. But they can't play with 5 players. We can't just play with 2 centre-backs, 1 centre midfielder, 1 left wing and 1 centre forward. We're going to need a goalkeeper. We're going to need a right and a left back. Those players I refer to as facilitator players, the ones who have to play so that to facilitate the learning and the development of the players who the clubs think can get to the top level. And that's where it becomes a little bit of a murky world. And I've entered debates about whether clubs should be more open, about whether some of these players are seen as these facilitator players. Some people refer to them as shirt fillers, but that's where the term came from.
Right. And you have a strategy or framework called the 3 E's, but also the loan focus.
Yeah.
Can you explain what the 3 E's is? Obviously, I know it, but for the audience and the listener.
Yeah, so the E model comes from, so we use 6, 3 we'll start a bit of 6 of a way in which of using all the data that I've got. So just to sort of bring you back, as you said at the introduction, there's over 300 players in the sample and 10 years worth of their career trajectories. So what we're then able to do is to plug players in. A parent joins me with a child going, all right, I don't need to know what club it is. Don't really care what club it is, just what level. Okay. The championship level. Right. Well, let's look at the 68 people who were in championship level. What were their experiences of a scholarship? What happened to them over the first 5 years? What happened to them? How many moves did they make? How many went up? How many came down? What were all the sort of experiences along the next 10 years? And we can start planning for that at 16, 17. There doesn't need to be a surprise. I've talked quite often about you've got to expect 5 moves in 5 years. So in some respects, what's happened to Kobe Mainu, it's like, if he'd been working with me from 16, I'm like, we need to prepare for 5 moves in 5 years. Don't be going, I'm a Man United player. The data over a bigger sample would suggest that moves are going to be coming. I mean, to be fair to him, he asked for a loan move, didn't he? So E's come from engage, which is, if you're a parent, I mean, I also think a club, parent, player, club, engage with this. Don't just pretend that it's career planning is something that, I'm going to see what happens. The second E is early, because the earlier that you can really get onto this, the better, and start to talk about some of these things. We talk less about it with, a 10-year-old, 11, 12-year-old, but we can still start to talk about foundations of why you're playing football. So we've got engage early. Then it's about events. So what are the events that are going to be coming up along the way? Your 5 moves in 5 years. 2 of those are going to be loan deals. Are you going to go abroad? Because that's going to increase your chances of getting a professional contract. Once we start talking about events, the next E is envision. We have to, me as a career coach, parent, family member, whoever, agent, whoever wants to come on the call, the more the merrier. We all have to talk about how we're going to deal with this in each of those. It's no good just pretending that what if you got given £50,000 a week? Okay. So your task here is you're going to go off and find 3 independent financial advisors and ask what you would do with 50 grand a week. Let's start to talk about that now before you've got the money, because once you've got the money, too late. Everybody's going to want to give you financial advice then, right? So then we've envisioned, evaluate. Things happen in your career, so you might want to just reevaluate. I've got to move up a division. Fine. And the 6E, which is the most important thing, and it's the reason I exist, is enjoy. So that once we've worked through that, which is, I'm not saying it's easy, but you're in a place to be present. You're in a place to understand the industry that you're in as a player, as an employee, and you're present. So when that 6-month loan deal arrives, you'd planned for it. You knew it was coming. You know what to do. You can be present. You know it's that relationship between you and the grass, between you and the ball, you and the game, and that's where you can then get to a place where you're not looking back as your career's ended, thinking, I could have made more of that. Could have made more of that. That's where we want players to be. That's where we want kids to be.
Right. And one question I kind of ponder on is, you're in the business of advising families and players, so to speak. And you've obviously touched upon, not just in this discussion, but lightly on the need for coaches who are obviously the direct contact with these players and potentially the parents or guardians, for them to understand the importance of them to have the sort of like the skills to deal with these players at this age. So like the emotional intelligence and the nuances that they need to be able to embed within their own communication and dealing with these players and also the families of these players when it comes to not just currently managing the players, but also potentially post after play care. But my question to you is, your situation, I guess you're a businessman in this case, and you're in the business of providing ethical support to families and players in the football industry, which is a cutthroat business in its own right. What are you doing personally to sort of like embed yourself in terms of emotional intelligence, nuances, cultural differences, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I would completely agree with you. Going back to your point about Manchester United, if I was advising there, I think it would be a really positive step if coaches who are engaging with kids undertook psychological courses. Not about, because these can be great coaches, but at that level, it's about understanding a child. Like, how does a child manage rejection? How does a child cope with pressures? What's, I'm a dad. It's a real baffling sort of environment. And I think coach development lags behind in that regard. So it's definitely something I've done. I've just completed, ironically, I've just completed a counselling course because I wanted to make sure that the sociological theory that I've got, how do you translate when you're in a scenario where I'm online in an online meeting, say like this? Obviously, it wouldn't be with anybody under the age of 18 one-on-one. Parent or guardian or carer would always be there. But it's a case where you're talking about emotions and talking about feelings. And it's like, that is a skill, for me to develop. So yeah, absolutely. That was something I did. And again, counseling would be an unbelievable thing for coaches to. Coaching is, I'm an active coach in field hockey. I've in a past life been course leader for a sport coaching degree. It's a social relationship. It's completely built on relationships. When people say he's lost the dressing room, she's lost the dressing room, what they really mean is that the relationship, the social bond between the people has taken a hammer in. It's started to fall away. It's not as strong as it was or needs to be to get stuff done. So any of those things would be such positive steps for an academy. It would be one way in which an academy could make strides against other academies very, very quickly. You would need coaches to buy in. You would need, and I think that the direction on doing something like that would need to come from quite high up in a club. It would, whether it's CEO level, director of football level, would be, we are doing this. Head of player care saying, I think we should all do this. It's not going to happen. It's probably not going to happen. You're going to get pushback.
Mm.
I'm a coach. I just deal with it on the pitch. Like, I'm not a babysitter. But you're
No,
missing the nuance.
right, right. Completely agree with you. I mean, and then touching back on the 6 E's framework, you said distilled down to three. I think one of the E's is events, and events comes with using data, insight, and research across the board. How are you maintaining the sort of the expansive nature of data, being able to find those granular insights that can be actionable? Are you potentially looking at creating adjacent data outside of the UK, so Spain, Germany, other markets, or is that something that's in
I'd
your
love to.
consideration?
I'd
Yeah.
love to. Yeah, I think I've committed now, whatever, to this being my life's work. I've said before that I think this PhD did change my life in the experience I went through. And then you start on the publishing a PhD, and then you realize at the end of a PhD, you have 100 more questions than you started with when you when you dropped into your PhD. I mean, at the Cross, I've got some PhD students who've done studies along similar lines. One is comparing North America basketball in the NCAA and ice hockey in Canada with the Premier League. So we'd really like to get some data on this in ice hockey from Canada. So some different sports, and the learning across sports will be really good in that. As you point to, the different pathways in different countries. I spent last week at Benfica, and they have very different pathways, very different approaches with their under-21s and under-23s, a B team. So much more time for their younger players to develop, and they're very potent at being the sell-on club that I referred to before. If I had 48 hours in a day rather than 24, I'd love to keep going on this. So it's just where it goes. I'd been approached as well about a study which would start perhaps with pre-academy data now. I think with mine starting at 16, it's great insight. And it probably is the point at which people start to get more serious. But how long can I keep talking about the survivorship bias without somebody legitimately turning around and saying, why don't you do the study then? Why don't you do the study of trying to collect some data from the kids who drop out, which research-wise is fraught with difficulty. Because where do they go? How do you, when they're in clubs, you can get hold of participants. Once they leave, how do you get hold of them?
Mm.
It would need probably the FA or Premier League backing. It would need that, somebody with a database of players. I would love this to go anywhere. I really would. I'd love other people to get my work. And there are people, Joe Miller, who's doing the PhD, Abby Carrington doing work in this, Jacob Griffiths doing work in this, Nick Gibbs doing work in this. I'll have forgotten others. Let's just keep going. Let's keep going. The power of science and research and bringing these perspectives that challenge narratives and challenge orthodoxy is the way we move things forward and we improve things. So yeah, I'm all for that. Involving me, not other people going for it. Great.
Right. So one of the sort of like the blueprints for modern youth development, and I think you've stated this in an article not too long ago, and I think one of them was, amongst others, so amongst strategize, reduce hierarchies and increase interaction, embrace transparency. But there's one that I want to like focus on, which is reduce hierarchies and increase interaction. So you talk about eliminating like harmful hierarchies in terms of like the differential treatment that academies get compared to the first team. Would it be fair to say that these are sort of like cultural issues that become even more difficult to, let's call it shake off or reset? And if so, how can we potentially change the, trajectory of this?
There's the famous story, isn't there, that I hope I don't know if it's true, but I'll go with it anyway, of Andreas Villas-Boas at Chelsea when I don't know where they were flying, but John Terry ended up in economy and have you heard this story?
Yes, I
I'm
have.
not, and the scholars ended up in the first class.
Yeah.
And what Villas-Boas was trying to do was smooth out the hierarchy in some respects and say, look, nobody's bigger than anybody else here. Went terribly, got sacked. And John Terry's been pretty vocal in saying from that moment onwards, he lost the dressing room. So it's a problem. But this is where I see it as an issue. And I listened to Brené Brown's podcast on the Diary of a CEO last week, and she made reference to something similar. I will hear a coach say all the time, or leaders or players, you've got to trust each other out there. Okay, let's drill down into that. How do you build trust with somebody? Do you build trust with somebody by mistreating them, changing boundaries, undermining them, or do you build trust with them by actions that mean they start to trust you? It's the second. Yet these could be young players that have come into the squad. They could be scholars just in your club, and they will go, and they are on the receiving end of behavior which develops mistrust. They're not sure how to deal with this. And if you speak to scholars up and down the country, they will tell you that they'll never go on the front foot to talk to like a first team player. If the first team player's done it first, great. And they'll be like, oh, he's great because he comes and chats to us and great. But there's already skepticism. So once we start mixing in initiations, once we start mixing in behaviors around like things going missing, once we start mixing in you've got to get the equipment from the first team, and once we start mixing in you get your food second, we ain't building relationships that are trustworthy. Now, if you are truly honest about getting those scholars into your first team, what are you going to do when, and again, coaches will say when they're on that page, we need to trust that everybody can do their job. We've just been spending 2 years developing mistrust. But now you want them to go out there and trust each other, do you? Now as club captain, John Terry, you want those lads coming through the Chelsea Academy to get on the pitch and trust you when you've been kicking off about this plane seat, whatever. So I'm not saying that this is an easy thing to do, but I am very clear, and I would stand behind all the research that highlights these cultures only breed mistrust. It's already a cutthroat industry. It's already players trying to get somebody else's position on the pitch. You've already got those complexities. So to then throw in more mistrust, to then throw in these practical pranks on each other, to then throw in all those elements, reduced interaction, first team only in that room, you can't get your food until the second. To then add those things in, first team can only go on that balcony. Oh no, we have to ask permission for the scholars to go out to that side. Once you start that, and it's like it's all just building mistrust. It's building mistrust in your organisation. It's building mistrust between people who eventually could end up being teammates on the pitch. That's just not going to be it. Brené Brown talks about it being building trust as you're putting marbles in a jar. Every time you do something that is kind, every time you do something that people like, it gives you another marble in the trust jar, and it builds up over time. Trust. You can't just go, trust me on this one. What reference point have I got to trust you? Because all the way through the last 3 years, you've been treating me like this, and now you want me to flip. It's not going to happen. So we've got to increase interaction between people around the club. That interaction has got to be a positive one. It's got to be a trust building one, and really sharp hierarchies between where we've got, lower kids in different kit and all this sort of stuff. Again, reinforce mistrust. It's not like we're all one club. We're not. It's like, no, we're the scholars. And my data shows that, the scholars know that. It's like, no, we're bottom of the club. But yet you want them to go out there and perform and be the best and things like that, when in every other bit of it, they're like, they've got to accept that they've not yet made it. That's where I come sort of passionately of where we could change a culture. If we could change culture, what returns a club would have? What returns?
All right, understood. And when we shift to look at the most important player, pun intended, which is a parent in this whole career planning or after plan for an athlete or player, what advice are you giving to parents in terms of like not being passive but being proactive and being educated about the ins and outs of the industry? What sort of, because I look at it and say, not only do you need to have a career plan for the athletes, you need to have a career plan or advisory plan for the parents or whoever the guardian is.
Yeah. So my I guess my first advice, which is usually this is why parents reach out to me, but read and read reliable sources. There are people out there. There are podcasts out there. There's, you're one of them. There's Number One Fan Club. There's my website. There's a Beyond Football podcast. There are people going through this. Attend events and ask questions. Reach out to other parents who've been through it is another good thing to do. So I do think it's about educating yourself. My first step always with parents include 2 questions. Why are you doing this? I said this to the club, didn't I? Why have you got an academy? Parent, why are you doing this? And the first session that I'd do with a kid would be to the parents go in one way, the kid goes the other, and they write down why they want to be in an academy, why they're in an academy, why they want to be a professional footballer. Because you got to get the kid and the parent to talk about that and be on the same page. What's the foundations of why you're doing what you're doing? Ironically, most of the people that I speak to, the kids would play for free. The kids will play for free. Yeah, of course, I love football. All right, would you play for free? Probably. So where's all this stress coming from about getting into an academy? Actually, it's down, you want to be the best. It's about status here. It's about, now we can start talking about external rewards versus intrinsic rewards and all these things. We can start talking about vulnerability. We can start talking about, you're going to have some courage along the way. What does that mean? What happens when things go wrong? The second thing that I would say to parents is never, ever, ever forget that a football club is a business. And when you take your 6-year-old to that club, you might be taking them there because they like football and they're a fan of Middlesbrough. But the reality is Middlesbrough are looking at your kid as an asset straight away. Will they be somebody we can sell in the future? We're a develop and sell club. Will they be somebody we can get into our first team? Because we're a loss leader club and we want to get them into our first team. That's it. And then it'll be like, if they got a good attitude, even at 6, 7, I'll hear coaches, what are they like physically? What are they like technically? And 6, they've got, 12 more years of development. What are you judging that about? I mean, you can't tell me whether he's going to be a professional player any more than I can, So from a parent's perspective, you have to go in to understand that is the job of the academy. It's not their fault. I'm going to go at them. That is the job of the academy. So once you're aware of that, then you can come back going, right, so are we happy with our why? Because, if I'm honest, I don't think there's any problem going, look, we're going to play football, highest level he can possibly play grassroots. When he's 12, if an academy wants him, we'll talk.
Right.
But 6, I don't know, some people could say, well, it's free. Don't know, we're not paying, and so Manchester United are putting on this for free, so, fine. You have to understand that they're a business.
Right.
You have to understand that. That's why they want your kid. They want your kid for his good,
Right. I mean, there was a recent article about the need for more psychologists within football clubs. And this is now the issue around the mental health and players, being succumbing to suicide. And this has been going on for decades now, I think. Do you think clubs are taking this seriously? I mean, there's a club called Crystal Palace, which I'm sure everyone's heard. Crystal Palace is obviously one of the clubs that's actually doing something here, but I don't think they're doing enough in terms of like increasing the actual demand for this sort of solution. What's your advice to the Premier League in general, and maybe David Cogan, who's obviously in charge of mediating any backstops between the two leagues. But having this sort of being a pressing issue as opposed to just the financial regulatory parts of football being an issue within England. So being in terms of like the epidemic of players being, let go, having succumbing
Yeah.
to mental issues.
Yeah, this is probably the most complex area that we're dealing with, I would say, at the moment. Somebody told me yesterday about another young lad who's died of suicide, having been released from a club. So I do think this is something that is on the agenda, and unfortunately probably won't be going away anytime soon. I got into a debate on LinkedIn about this, and it brought out some really interesting takes. I think we have to be open to the fact that there is a bit of an issue having sports psychologists in clubs in the area of mental health. And it isn't, again, it's not the fault of the sports psychologist, but there are two key things. One, are they trained in the mental health area? Two, are they employed for well-being person before player stuff, or are they focused on psychology for performance outcomes? Because those are very different things, and the vast range of psychological support needs to be understood, I think. And I'm never quite sure. My data would testify that kids in clubs are rather closed to disclosing everything to somebody who's wearing club kit, who's employed by a club. Now, on this, and you've pointed to the developments around offering more support, I think there is an element that some of this is now available independent of clubs, which I think is a great move. I think that takes some burden off, probably, quite frankly, sports psychologists in clubs who are going to be a bit overworked anyway, trying to do a lot of things and maybe trying to cover all bases, to give some independent space away from a club, which is essentially what I do. I don't do this psychology stuff, but what I'm saying is my service works well because it's independent of clubs. Like I said, you can come to me and not even tell me which club you're at. That's fine. You slag off whichever coach you want. He's never going to find out. He or she's never going to find out. That's deliberate because of the research that I've done in the past when people have confided in me. It's, things always get back. No, I'm not sure I'd say something like that. I wouldn't say that. On to your point around, is enough being done? Had this question before, is what is enough? That's the thing that the researcher in my brain is going, if we're going to ask clubs to do enough, so say whoever it might be, Wolverhampton Wanderers, Brentford, Crystal Palace, Plymouth, Sheffield Wednesday, Leeds, you're not doing enough. Well, we've got to be fair to them, we've got to set out what is enough. Or somebody's got to. And that is subjective. That is always going to be subjective. And I would guess that different players are going to want different amounts. It isn't going to be one size fits all. So the reality of elite sport is that it's going to put your mental health under some sort of strain. It just is. Elite sport is about pushing mind, body, soul to the edge a lot. Again, I would rather be having those conversations with somebody when they were 14, 15, 16 and being honest about it than dressing football up to be this amazing, unbelievable world. Like, you can get paid so much money and it's like women and cars and it's unbelievable. That's nothing like it. Nothing like it. the reality of being it. So yeah, that's sort of my recollection of where we are. If we're going to say, I don't think they're doing enough, my question back is always, well, what is enough? I'm not suggesting I think it's acceptable that we have these outcomes, but have we got measures which we are happy with, which we can present to clubs, standards which we would say is enough? And I think I kind of hoped that the regulator would include some more of this, the new football regulator in this country, but it doesn't seem to be the case, which is a shame. And I think it's definitely an area that needs investigating, that needs more with. I've had parents with severe injury concerns talking about abuse in clubs. It exists. It's there. But if we're going to talk to clubs or go into clubs and work in clubs and talk about enough and what we need a level that is enough.
Mm.
You know,
Right. So, I mean, if we look at, the philosophy that you follow from Simon Sinek, which is the start with why, I think every business leader is well familiar with this framework, and you see it successfully embedded within football, the culture of football. What's sort of like the outcome of this if academies shift their perspective from the 2% who successfully make it, but to consider the other sort of like the widest spectrum of players in terms of like the post transition and having
yeah,
that as a key metric? What would that
yeah.
become? What would that be like? What would be the after effect of that?
This is like Narnia. This is like where we would get to if we were. I often think my job is to ask the difficult questions that need asking. So I would ask, why do we exist? What are we trying to achieve? So the end point would be that we would have a strategy with defined outcomes that we are aiming towards. We would have a group of staff coherent behind that, all understanding where we are traveling and the outcomes that we are after. This is who we are as an academy and what we are trying to achieve. In that, I would also say, okay, I'm making an assumption that whatever our strategy is, it's going to be about developing good players,
Right.
right? Assuming that there's no academy, so we just exist to, I don't know, for whatever reason, right? So what are good players? Good players are people who have standards in every level of their life. They're ones who reach their full potential. When you look at the research, they don't just walk into a football club and turn on and be good footballers. They're good at nutrition. They're good parents. They're good at everything that they do. So they're good leaders. So let's develop these young people, because they are people first, to be the best human beings. And one of the things that I would have, one key sort of indicator I would have is, can we take a kid at 8 or 9, whatever, release them at 18? So we have them for 10 years and they get really close to the dream of becoming a professional. And in our view, we say we just don't think this is going to happen for you.
Right.
Like, that's the closest that they can get. That's probably the worst news we can give. If, having said that, that child still goes out into society saying, I disagree that Manchester United released me, but I'd definitely do it again because I got this from it. I got this from it. The door's always open. They're still in touch with me. There's some support there post-career, support for who I am. I developed this while I was there. If we can be in that space where not only will we have better people coming through our academy and then going out flying the flag for who we are, but we've also have better players on the pitch. We'll have better leaders, more rounded individuals, better thinkers on the pitch, better under pressure, more courageous, able to wear the pressure of being a footballer, better with the money, less stressed economically, all these things.
Mm.
That's where I would be. And I would be saying that this is a non-negotiable. Like, this foreclosure of we're just football and all these other things are like a bit fluffy around the edge. You go and find the top players. They're good at everything.
Right.
And we could develop that. So that's where I would, if I was given a blank slate with an academy, I'd be asking those difficult questions.
Right.
So that we get to a place with a solid strategy of why we're existing. how we're feeding into the club hierarchy, the first team, the under 21s, or what are we trying to do with that? You know,
Right.
and then we can be more transparent about it.
Right.
We can be talking to parents, carers, guardians about this is what we're trying to do. Are we going to get it right all the time? No.
Right.
No strategy just comes off all the time. Perfect. This is how, by the way, this is how we monitor it as well.
Right. Right. Great. And then, the final side of the discussion I'd like to touch upon is just a quick um, question and answer. So, quick fire. So, basically, the first question I have is, you know, so obviously you have 15 years plus experience working on this, over 303 scholars involved, 13 coaches, 20 welfare officers, and you've obviously been able to uncover the realities of the football academy. What do you think football can learn from other sports in other countries that we're currently lacking, and that you'd like to see embedded or included within the football culture?
I think it's a question of culture, isn't it? I would encourage, and I think a lot of clubs sort of do this, but I would encourage clubs to go and to see how other countries, perhaps with less resource, manage things. The examples of clubs in Sweden where it's optional if you turn up to coaching up to the under 12s. Benfica, who do gymnastics between the ages of 6 and 18 with all their players. Go and sample how other sports and other academies work. What are the golden nuggets that are in there that can be used rather than being stuck into the rolling from year to year with doing things the same? I would say, I think this takes strategic development from people higher up in the club.
Right.
I don't think an academy manager can just go, or a director of an academy could just go and then come back and start to implement all these things, because there's likely to be budget implications and so on and so forth. So I think there are those elements that you could find in other sports around the world or other clubs in football around the world and bring them back and integrate those things.
Right. Second question is, what do you think the football governing bodies such as UEFA, FIFA, what do you think they need to do to be more proactive as opposed to reactive or passive when it comes to this sort of like situation?
That's suggesting that they are passive and reactive. I don't know on that one whether I want to get drawn in on that. But I mean, for FIFA and UEFA, they are more regulatory, I would say, in that regard. They've got to make sure the compensation schemes are in place. They've got roles around child protection, safeguarding, and those areas, rather than dictating, I would say, to a club, this is how we think you should run an academy. That's where I think they need to be. And the
Right.
FIFA guardians that runs, etc. Just a PhD student who's finished a study on that. That's, I would say, is always going to be their role, rather than saying, this is how we think academies should run around the world.
Right.
Yeah.
Understood. The final question would be, what book has impacted you the most in terms of becoming who you are currently, your values and your worldview, both within sports and outside of sports?
I'll pick one. How shall I go? So I would say, now this is going to sound an odd one, but the most recent one that I think has changed my view on things, there's two that are in my head and I don't know which to go for. There's a book called, I might give him both, Quit, called that by Annie Duke, Quit. And it's about how to quit well, which when you start from that point, it's a bit weird. But it's a fantastic book for strategically understanding how to change direction quickly, how to understand when things aren't going the way you want them to and change, how to be nimble. And in the world of professional sport, professional football, while there are things that are so constant, like fan loyalty or whatever, the world is changing very quickly. And I found that an absolutely outstanding book. And I've used some of the stories and techniques in there with parents of understanding when to know when things need to move and change and how to be proactive in that regard.
Right.
So I wouldn't sit with a parent of a player who's been released. I was talking to one yesterday, been released from Liverpool. Liverpool are going to start sending out, clips to other clubs. Why are you waiting for that? Why are you letting Liverpool do that?
Right.
You could have a spreadsheet already. You could have with AI, and you could have recruitment, and you could be you could start to make phone calls already.
Right.
Why
Right.
are you waiting for somebody else to control that for you? That's straight out of Annie Duke. And so I would probably, of the most up to date ones, that one's been yeah, that one really, really helped me and changed the way I thought around the negative connotation of quitting.
Right.
As not a negative thing all the time. There's loads of stories in there of people who have quit at the right time,
Right.
and it's
Right.
revolution their life on to be, whatever, billionaires and these sorts of things, because they've been courageous in the need to move and to change, whether that be change clubs, for example, in
Right.
the environment we talk about. So I would probably pick that one.
Right. I mean, maybe another alternative name for that title of the book would be pivoting as opposed to quit because of the connotation of the word. But
Yes.
the point's well understood. Thank you
Yeah,
so much, Dr. Chris. You brought in a valuable range of insights and advice to parents, caregivers, and clubs and the industry as a whole to understand what needs to be done to revolutionize the problem of players being let go the wrong way and player development and aftercare. If you would like to connect with Dr. Chris, we'll put the links in below. And if you want to obviously learn more, please get in contact with him. We'll put the website also. And thank you again, Dr. Chris, for coming on the show.
absolute pleasure. Thanks ever so much.
Perfect. Great. And that's it for the football economy and the rest of the discussion. Please share and like the episode. And until next time, have a good one. Take care. Bye bye.